Good morning, or afternoon, depending on where you're viewing the show from. Welcome to another episode of the Indoor Environment Show. I'm Bob Krell, founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine. And as always, I'm joined by my co host, Mr. Don Weeks, who is the president of the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, IEQ-GA. I'll get it straight, Don.
Hi, how
Good
are
to
you
see you.
doing today? Good to see you too. We have
This
a
is
special
interesting.
show today. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we have live events. Live events seem to be our thing now. Just less than a month ago, you and I were together in person in Nashville, Tennessee, for the AIH CE event. That was interesting because that was our first time doing the show sitting at a table together. So
Yeah.
now you're
Yeah.
back in Ottawa and I'm back in Syracuse, and we're doing it conventionally. So
Yeah. It's good to be back, though. I'm looking forward to today's meeting, today's
yeah.
session broadcast.
So today's show is interesting because we actually have our guests coming to us live from Finland, right now
Hmm.
from the Indoor Air 2022 event, which is fabulous. They're on a little bit of a different time zone, so they're coming to us late in the day, and we're in the morning, but that's all good. So I guess without further ado, Don, I'll let you go through the introductions.
Yeah, we have three members of the ISIAQ, and first one is Martin Täubel, member of the ISIAQ Board of Directors and Coordinator of Relations and Other Organizations. Ms. Martin has 15 years of research experience in the topic of indoor microbial exposure and the associated adverse and beneficial health effects. He is working as a lead researcher at the Environmental Health Unit of Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare in Kuopio, Finland, where he's heading a multidisciplinary research team studying indoor microbial exposures and associated health effects. The second guest is Corinne Mandin, who is the president of ISIAQ. She has 20 years of experience on human exposure to chemicals in indoor environments, first at the INERIS, French National Institute for Industrial Environment and Risks, and now at CSTB, which is the French Scientific Technical Center for Buildings that she joined in 2009. She leads a group of researchers in charge of implementing the French Indoor Air Quality Observatory, a permanent research program created by the French government in 2001 to carry out nationwide surveys of indoor air quality in buildings. And our third guest is Ulla Haverinen-Shaughnessy, who is a former ISIAQ Vice President for Research, and she's now chair of the ISIAQ Science and Technical Committee on IEQ guidelines. She has over 25 years of experience for research pertaining to indoor environmental quality and healthy buildings, and she's a visiting professor, senior research associate at the University of Tulsa since 2006, and also professor at the University of Ulla since 2020. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank you
invitation.
very much.
I guess it would be an
Yes.
excellent time just to make a quick pause and mention that our broadcast is a joint collaboration between ISIAQ, the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate, and the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance.
Yes,
There's
and
the
this
plug.
is the ISIAQ conference on indoor air. The indoor air conference is just finished in Finland, and so I'm going to call upon Corinne to give us summarize the conference in a few words and figures.
Thank you, Don. Before giving you a few figures, I can remind our audience that we were in Kuopio in Finland. Kuopio is the 8th cities in Finland with 120,000 inhabitants. We are in the Lake District in eastern Finland, and this is a beautiful landscape. And we had a wonderful conference in the middle of the forest and the lakes. So a few figures about the conference. We were 606 participants. 444 were on site. The other one were online. We were from 41 countries, and the top 3 countries with participants were Finland, of course, USA, and Japan. We had a very rich program with a total of 49 sessions and 29 workshops that we will summarize in a few seconds. And just last figures is about the summer school. We had a summer school for for PhD students and early career researchers on Saturday and Sunday with 40 participants from 17 countries. And it was very exciting to welcome these future leaders in indoor air sciences.
Yes, tell me a little bit more about that student activity, the school. That sounded really interesting to me, and I was glad to hear about it. What was the overall theme or topic that you covered in that sessions? Corinne?
Yeah, Martin participated to the summer school, so I let Martin say a few words about the topics and the...
Well, so in terms of the topics, it was sort of like a good mix between some more lectures, like substance presentations. So I've been teaching there around the microbes in built environments. There were sessions on online sensors and so forth. So there was some substance there as well. But then we thought that it would be really, really good. And this is all the credits going there to Kati Huttunen, who I think over half a year was trying to put together an interesting program for the students, and I think they loved it. But they did have hands-on experience as well, working with online sensor measurements and sensor data. They did learn about why it would be a good idea to be on Twitter and what to do, and especially what not to do on Twitter. So kind of like also getting some information about how to do a good poster presentation, and this kind of like skill development as well. So not only substance, because you can get substance from anywhere, but there was, I think, the biggest charm of that summer school is that the students are kind of like locked in together with some of the senior scientists that have a lot of experience and can show them the ropes and tell how did I end up here and how did my career develop. And I think this is what the students really were most interested in.
Having the ability to do hands-on and actually, have a true experience, I think is super valuable. That seems very forward-thinking.
Great, that's terrific. So Ulla, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is the many workshops during the convention. And can you give us a kind of an overview of what were the topics that were discussed?
Sure. So I also wanted to mention that the conference president was Professor Pertti Pasanen from the University of Eastern Finland, and in the organizing got a lot of help from ISIAQ, the Finnish Society for Indoor Air Quality and Climate, and then we had Professor Heidi Salonen from Aalto University, who is in charge of the technical program, and I had the smaller role of being in charge of the workshops. But so like Corinne mentioned, we had a total of 29 workshops in the conference, and just the general overview, I sort of categorized them according to different topics, and we had 6 workshops on special environments, including hospitals, schools, and residential buildings. Then we had 6 workshops on different methodologies, 5 workshops on exposures, 3 on health outcomes, and then 6 workshops on different mitigation strategies, and 4 workshops on guidelines. So many excellent topics and workshops and active discussion and communication during the workshops.
Great, yeah. Were there a few workshops that were a focus for the conference, and maybe you can describe them in some detail, you and Corinne?
Yeah, I can mention two specific workshop to start. We had a workshop on burden of disease. I don't know if our audience is familiar with burden of disease, but this is the way to quantify the impacts of an environmental risk, to quantify in terms of premature deaths or in terms of years of life with a disease. So it's very useful to have such figures for policymakers to decide what if an environmental issue is more important than another one. So it's more and more used, and it's used also for indoor air science researchers to hierarchize the priorities. And so we had a workshop dedicated to this, because we now in several countries in the world, such evaluation have been made in France, for example, or recently in China. And in addition to the number of people who die prematurely or who are sick due to indoor air pollution, we can also express this impact in terms of euro or yuan or dollars. So once again, it helps dimensioning a political, scientific and public health issue. And for example, in France, when we calculated the burden of disease due to indoor air pollution, we came to the figures of that this pollution is equivalent, the cost of this pollution is equivalent to 1% of the GDP. And in China, recently, they did this calculation, and the cost is 3.4% of GDP. So it shows that it has a huge impact on the society, on the country, this pollution. And now we advocate that for the inclusion of indoor air pollution in the global burden of disease, because it's an international initiative started in the 80s by the World Bank to quantify the impact of environmental risk and to quantify the impact of the diseases. And this global burden of disease is done regularly since the 80s. Now it's carried out by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But it does not include indoor air pollution. It includes outdoor air pollution, car accidents, and many types of risks and many types of diseases. But indoor air pollution is not included. So we would like that ISIAQ and all the indoor air science community is able to include this indoor air pollution in this evaluation to show that it has an impact. It must be taken into account.
Those are substantial numbers, though, Corinne. I mean, 1 to 3% GDP effect by that. That's
exactly.
billions of dollars.
Exactly. Yeah. It's in France when indoor air pollution is 20,000 premature deaths per year. So it's not negligible. It's important, and calculating such figures helps make the pollution real, because indoor air pollution is not real for many people. So with COVID, with the pandemic, awareness was raised on indoor air quality, but before it was not the case. So that's why we had this workshop to discuss, to share methods, because there is not harmonized methods. So we need to discuss about the methods, but also to see how we can move forward, how we can push this topic to be more included in this global evaluation. And the second workshop I could mention it was a workshop on radon, because we observed that radon has disappeared from indoor air conferences over the time. But radon is a major indoor air pollutant as well. It's coming back to burden of disease. In many countries, radon is the number 2 in terms of deaths or cancer. So it has a huge impact on public health. But radon has more or less disappeared. So the idea was to put radon again in the agenda of indoor air conference. And ISIAQ has a partnership with ERA, the European Radon Association, and that's why we organized this workshop together to discuss about this topic and the mitigation. Because today it's easy to manage radon in buildings. There are many techniques, ventilation. The tools exist, so there is no reason to ignore this topic, and we need to decrease radon concentration in buildings in radon-prone areas, not everywhere, of course, but in dwellings that are subject to radon.
Well, and important thing I think to stress is that usually the mitigation costs are negligible. It's not that expensive, especially for a single-family residence. Smaller buildings, a radon mitigation system's not that costly, and
exactly.
quite easy. Several hours and the work is complete.
Yeah, exactly. And in new buildings, it's easy to take into account this when you're building a new building. This is even easier than in existing buildings. So we must raise awareness about this issue in the part of the world where there is radon.
So Martin and Ulla, did you have some more discussion on workshops that you organized?
Yes. I was thinking one of the big topic that was discussed a lot during the conference is the use of low-cost sensors and all the challenges and opportunities that are related to those. And there was also one workshop related to low-cost sensors, and one of the main points raised is that they do provide useful data to the users and building occupants, but we also have to explain what these data mean and what they don't mean and what we don't know yet. And then we also, yes, go ahead.
No, sorry.
So we then also have close to me was a workshop related to indoor environmental quality guidelines, and also in that workshop we discussed about building performance assessment and continuous monitoring, and it came out very strongly that we need standardized methods on how to use these sensors and monitors and how to interpret the results, and in general the need of bringing scientists and practitioners from different countries together to share information about guidelines and best practices and to tackle these challenges globally.
So I did have a question for you, Ulla. So on the sensors that you're referring to, are these commercial sensors, or are these more of the low cost things that you see in the consumer realm that you're discussing?
I think they are both of those, and they are used also in research more all the time. So, but there are challenges like related to the validity of the data and how to actually utilize all the information that we are collecting and what can be said based on them.
Martin?
Go ahead, Martin.
So Martin?
Yeah,
Martin, you have something to add?
Yes, so I just wanted to add on, I think, because we're always talking about, expensive measurement equipment and low-cost sensors, and there's evolving something in between where companies are trying really to push the boundaries of quality assurance and getting really, really good data with these sensors. And then, it goes from low cost to, mid cost. So we're talking about like a few hundreds of euros or dollars for one of these devices. But then they will integrate machine learning and artificial intelligence to, really leverage the potential and the wealth of data that they can generate, and also utilize this in the calibration of the devices. And there's like really, really promising developments in terms of like how accurate and how good data these sensors can produce. So I think it's a major step into the future.
I mean, there certainly is question as far as standardization, right? Because there's so many different devices on the market, and there really aren't, in general, especially the low-cost devices, are really not following any real standardization from what I've seen.
No, I agree. And this is exactly the area where the research is coming in and trying to really push. I think calibration is like the central mm-hmm. aspect in here. And this is where a lot of the improvement can be done and will be done. Sorry, Ulla.
Yes, and it was also discussed in one of the sessions or workshops that these low-cost sensors may be particularly useful for building occupants who can themselves measure, and then for as long as they know how they can do what they can do to improve the situation if they notice some issues with ventilation, for example, or heating or other pollutants.
So, Ulla, you mentioned something about indoor air quality standards as well. Was there some discussion at this meeting about the potential of setting standards for indoor air quality?
Well, ISIAQ has been working throughout this scientific technical committee to collect information about existing guidelines and standards, and also making it openly available for anyone through a website that has been opened. And then that's like the first step when we start knowing what's out there and that can be used, because many countries don't have indoor environmental quality guidelines, but we also have many countries who have them. So I think overall goal would be to have more uniform guidelines globally existing, but there are also many challenges related to that, and how we can develop that kind of guidelines who would be applicable in different countries and different climates and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's one of the big problems. Go ahead, Corinne. Sorry.
Yes, sorry. Then we discussed during the conference that we need to move from prescriptive assessment, qualitative assessment, to performance-based assessment. We really need to measure the performance of building, and performance is energy, but it's also health and comfort, and so that's why we need both low-cost sensors to be able to massively assess the performance of building. And we need standards and guidelines to be able also to quantify the performance. So it was largely discussed during the conference.
Well, that certainly was one of the earlier complaints about even the LEED program, right, from U.S. Green Building Council, because it was prescriptive, but as far as in actual practice, a year later or several years later, was the building actually performing to those those prescriptive standards? And they found often, right, that wasn't the case.
We had a great keynotes this morning from Dusan Lisina about this green building certification. How do certified buildings perform? Do they perform better than the classical buildings? And this is during this keynote that Dusan Lisina introduced that we need to move from a prescriptive assessment to really a performance based on measurement to assess the real performance of buildings.
So that brings up a point. I would have loved to have heard that keynote. Where does ISIAQ stand as far as sharing that type of session at this point? Where are you going with that? Is there a possibility somebody who couldn't attend, for example, be able to pick up some of these sessions and be able to listen to them?
Yeah, the keynotes are available for free on our website in replays for since a few years. They are either LC buildings or indoor air conferences. All the keynotes, if the presenters were okay, are available on our website. So I guess soon the keynote from this conference will also be available on ISIAQ.org website.
That'd be great, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who would be interested in the topic that you mentioned. And I've looking at the other keynotes, as I said, I've been following on Twitter. They certainly sound like they would be great topics for people to listen to. So I'm hoping to be able to do that hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So moving on a little bit, Martin, go ahead, Corinne. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the keynotes were very inspiring, and we also mentioned the psychosocial aspect. And Martin, maybe you can go on this topic, because this was an important part of the keynotes we had on Sunday and Monday.
Right on. Do you want me to wrap up, continue there, or you had a question for me?
No, go ahead, Martin. I'll get back to the question. If you could follow up on what Corinne mentioned, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it was our opening keynote was kind of like something different. We are used a lot to look into the physical exposure and then assess the health effects and everything related in that axis as far as indirect quality is concerned. But then the opening keynote also introduced the concept that you have an exposure, and then you have the individual that is exposed, and there is a physical exposure through the exposing agents, and it can be chemicals, it can be microbes, it can be whatever. But then you also have the psychosocial pathway of exposure. So that means that people that are aware, for example, and this was brought up in the context of moisture damage and dampness, and specifically for the Finnish situations where we have, like, overall in Finland, of course, not saying that we don't have poorly performing buildings, but overall, if you compare to other countries, the chemicals in our air indoors are low. Moisture damage incidence is low. You name it. We typically we actually, with Corinne and also Ulla, we were involved in a European study with like 20 different countries, and you almost have to go to a different graph and scale in the graph to place Finland in terms of their PM levels and so on. So we have overall good indirect quality, but then at the same time, there is a major issue and major public discussion around, a lot of people have symptoms, a lot of people perceive the indirect quality poorly, a lot of people develop really severe symptom clusters, environmental sensitivities that relate to spending time indoors, and it was intriguing to figure out, like, how come, and this is where this whole concept of physical pathway and psychosocial pathway is coming up. And one thing that is happening in Finland is there is a lot of discussion, a lot of public discussion happening around indirect quality and health, specifically around the issue of moisture damage and associated exposures and health. So people are really, really aware and really sensitive to the topic. And there is, once the media gets on top of that, then there is a lot of discussion around, individual, it's storytelling around how a person got stuck into this situation and exposed to moisture damage and adverse exposures in a building, and cannot get out and get severely sick, which are really, really tragic stories. But that's being taken up a lot in the media, and people respond to that. So it was really, really interesting to see that there was one example around reporting symptoms by the parents of symptoms of their child in school. And we see really, really clearly that if the parent is exposed to poor indoor air quality, moisture damage in their own workplace, they are more likely, like in a dose response fashion almost, they're more likely to respond to report higher symptom prevalence for their kids in schools, which is not linked, right? So if the person has more issues around indoor air quality, they will report more symptoms even for their kids that are in school. What was even more interesting and intriguing is that if you ask the kids themselves, even they will report more symptoms than comparison kids. And that's due to that, they have discussions at home around the topic. They get the notion and the sensation of the parent being really worried around this topic. So there is a lot of things going on, and it's it's a big discussion here. People feel like it's a touchy subject because people many times respond that, well, you think this is only in our heads, and it's not. It's real. Every symptom is real. Every symptom has to be taken seriously. But then from a standpoint of how do we manage this issue, we need to understand, if we have a building, we need to understand in how far the exposure is physical and where it comes from, and mitigate the source, of course, and make the situation better. But then if you try to prioritize in which of the 1,000 schools in Finland we should start renovations immediately and which ones can wait, you cannot completely rely on symptom reports, because that is biased by all these things that I just tried to explain, where you really have to go into complex or more comprehensive building investigations and look into this. So it's a really, really fascinating part of our work nowadays. If we, in my opinion, if we want to have good answers for the physical exposure pathway, we need to acknowledge that there's also a psychosocial pathway, because you can't assess one without having some clue of the other. Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
And isn't it, Martin, also so that it's not only enough to then repair the building, but you also have to treat the individuals more holistically and understanding these issues?
Exactly, and recognizing that there is a real problem going on, and giving them the attention that is required is absolutely crucial. And this kind of now links to the discussion we just had about low-cost sensors. If people were more aware of the indoor air quality in their space, and would be also more under control. So they see CO2 is going up, and simple example, and they open a window and it goes back to green, right? So empowering the people, being more under control and more aware of what's really going on in their building, I think can be helping the situation quite a bit.
I mean, has there been discussion? Obviously the psychosocial effect is huge. As far as gender bias, potentially in the United States, certainly there seems to be, at least my experience as an indoor environmental consultant, there does seem to be that men are less apt to complain about indoor environmental conditions here, and women are more apt to. And not saying that, is it a psychosocial thing? Is it more of a actual a physiological difference? I don't know.
Yeah, you could think about perception and then also about being more outspoken maybe, but then that's a known fact. We know that there's certain age groups and female gender that will tell more about these issues and report. Yeah.
So Martin, other than that particular keynote, were there other keynotes that you can give us some information about what they described and what they talked about?
Well, I don't know. For the keynotes, I guess that the listeners can really and should go to the ISIAQ website, because we had these like really interesting topics. Corinne just explained about Dusan Lisina and the green buildings and how we need to move forward with this. What I will mention is that we had and I can tell more about the sessions later on. That was something that I looked up for the conference. But then I will mention that we had, of course, there were sessions around SARS-CoV-2, not surprisingly, of course, at the conference. We did talk a lot about COVID-19. And we did have an excellent, really high-class forum with 3 speakers, and then a lot of experts also being really present. I have to say I was a bit starstruck to some extent, because we had people like Lydia Moravska here. We had Giorgio Buonono from Italy, and then Kath Noakes. So all people that were really centrally and crucially involved in getting the science out there to the policymakers. Basically, if you remember in the early 2020, when WHO started talking about that, this is a hoax, airborne is not there. This was the group of people under that leadership that really and actually a lot of the ISIAQ members were involved, and of course also the IEQ-GA people and so on, giving the crucial information towards the recognition of airborne transmission routes, and which then changed within 3 months or so. Also WHO opinion and CDC and whatnot. So many of these people were here. So it was just amazing to be there. What I also really liked is nobody anymore wasted time anymore to speak about like how did we end up here and how bad is it, because we know, but it was a lot about mitigation, strategies to reduce transmission risk of airborne transmission specifically, and a central topic was ventilation and how that could help, and not just naively say that we have to ventilate more, but no, I mean we can't always. Our building stock isn't prepared to just wrap up the ventilation everywhere. Plus, it's a lot of energy use. So also like thinking of other mitigation strategies. But one thing that was really raised, which I will tell to our listeners, is that the ventilation in schools is like important, really important. There is some work from the Italian group coming up, and it really impressively shows that school compares the airborne transmission incidents in better versus worse ventilated schools in Italy, and showing really.
And Martin, it was specifically adding mechanical ventilation to schools, and they looked at different levels of ventilation after installation and showed really great responses. And we all also know this from previous research that having mechanical ventilation really seems to be pretty much the only way to be able to meet the standards, at least in Finland, in the case of Finland. But in addition to that, I wanted to add that we also had in the forum Professor Arsen Melikov, and he gave really great ideas about like personal ventilation strategies, and there are like new innovations coming as well in that sector. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I know that in one of the tweets that I saw that they were talking about personal ventilation. Could you give a little bit more details on that?
Well, Arsens showed these examples of like headsets that you can wear, that you can either have basically personal exhaust, so air is sucked from close to your mouth, or you can have a personal like fresh air coming to your breathing zone. And I find that really interesting, but of course, hopefully that technology will develop in the future, so that I don't know how easy this would be in practice to wear and to provide to people. But apparently the amount of air and also maybe the energy used in this way when you bring the air to individuals is much less than otherwise needed. So it's definitely something to look into and develop further.
And that would be bringing in outside air or fresh air. That's the thought, is that directing it to the occupant as opposed to a portable breathing filtration device, like a little.
These were portable
I have one of
devices.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I wear one of those actually through the whole pandemic. Little HEPA filtered unit with a USB powered thing that hooks to an N95 mask, and it's similar to a PAPR in theory, a P100 type system.
But there was also discussion about other type of personnel, like if you work in a stationary office, let's say, you can just have the different air distribution methods can be used.
That sounds similar to what I remember Olli Fanger talking about years ago in terms of personal ventilation systems. And it's interesting that it's coming around again. It certainly would be of interest to a lot of people to determine whether that's, as you say, practical for settings such as offices and maybe schools. So, Martin, you were also responsible for wrapping up the sessions. What were the main highlights that you can report to our audience?
Well, Donna, there were so many highlights that it's really, really hard. I just told the same thing this morning at the conference. We started off with like 30-something slides of bullet points of highlights that we collected during the sessions, and I had to burn it down. But I can give a few examples. I think maybe things that are not necessarily immediately on the top of our minds when we think about indirect quality. We thought that there were sessions around sustainable renovation and how energy retrofits, when they are performed on buildings, they should be always followed up with an indoor environmental assessment, and importantly also occupant education about again, getting back to the point that empowering people with knowledge of their indoor environment. You would think that's a no-brainer, but practically it's not being done in that sense. So energy retrofits are being done, and that's it, right? Take it or leave it. And then also thinking about when we talk about energy retrofits, trying to take this into the context of sustainability. Think about durability of the materials that are being introduced, the life cycle assessment, and of course also about the potential of creating harmful byproducts. But these were things we discussed. We had a really, really interesting discussion also around the indoor microbiome, even though there was too many microbiology sessions beyond, of course, the SARS-CoV-2 sessions now in this conference. And one of the speakers there talked about, we all know about the rural-urban context and how that affects the indoor microbiome and even asthma and allergy development. And we are very quick to say and use urban-rural as a variable that explains some of the bless you, some of the difference that we are seeing. But then really it's not a variable, it's a social construct, right? So if you look at rural urban, there is like so many things that are different from aspects, like even if you try to specify a little bit more and speak about surrounding greenness in an urban environment, is a grass-cutted lawn, probably fertilized, whereas green in a rural area is something completely different. So we talked a little bit about that, and that was really interesting work. Plus, and also thinking about how we need to take care in some ways of our environmental microbial exposure, and specific exposure time windows early in life. Because we do need the contact to environmental microbes and the immunological training, and indoor microbiota has been found to be like one modifiable target that we could go after. So that was really, really interesting stuff as well. We talked, of course, about the way we work has changed a lot. Thinking about hybrid work and working from home, how does that impact the performance? noise from the remote work, noise being one of the main contributors to the well-being at work. Everybody who has been doing remote work with the kids at home absolutely will know what we're talking about. But also these kind of aspects, and maybe that one of the sessions that one of the things that I do want to highlight also is, that how do we prioritize indoor air quality contributors, because like as we mentioned already in the beginning, indoor air isn't well regulated and we don't enforce it. It is we identify ourselves that it's our role really to demonstrate the pathway of enforcement, and that we need to include also performance standards. And one of the, when we talk about prioritization, we had a discussion around in how far randomized controlled trials could be useful in informing this. And so these were the things that have been discussed. I will also just throw one point out there, because it's I think close to the heart of many at ISIAQ and at the conference, that we identified that we need to have dedicated sessions for the developing nations and the problems that we really have to deal there. We need to get more of the people and researchers that deal with indoor air quality issues in places where those problems are really through the roof, in terms of, like, if you compare to the issues that we talk about in Europe and in the US, for example. So that was one thing that we identified. It's really, really important to get those people to these conferences in whatever way possible.
I mean, overall, was there a general sense that this pandemic and this whole SARS-CoV-2 scenario, is that a permanent change that we're going to be facing, or is it is there a feeling that we'll go back to maybe things as usual before, or will we actually use this as a stepping stone to improve our indoor environment? So I'm just curious, what the general the sidebar topics, not so much the presentations, but just the feel that that you had at the event, and that's out to all three of you actually.
Well, I can say that I think in general it is and should be a stepping stone, and there was discussion already that even if the current pandemic would be controlled, we are going to have new ones, then we have to be better prepared for those. So I think we have to stay busy for the next years to come to try and improve our preparedness for the future pandemics.
Yeah, I just can. Oh, sorry, Corinne, you can go ahead.
I agree with Ulla. I don't think we will go back as we were before in the previous world. I think we will, and people say, the scientists say that we will have other virus because we are living closer and closer to animals, because biodiversity is decreasing. So we will have new pandemics. So we can't ignore what happened and come back as business as usual. We need to change our life. Our life has already changed, and it will remain it will be different. I don't think we can ignore. We entered a new era, I think.
Yeah, I can just maybe add on that we as a group of research and as a society caring about indoor air quality, we completely recognize. Well, I will say that we even have to digest it even more, because now, like, what the pandemic did is that it put indoor air quality onto the policy agenda, right? And that's been something that we've been after for a really, really long time. We've talked about indoor air quality a lot, but really it was not on the top of the agenda. And now, it's there. And if we talk about providing effective means, making our buildings operate better so that we are prepared for pandemics, in essence, it means providing better indoor air quality in the bigger context. And so, this means that we now have an opportunity here, an opportunity that goes beyond just being prepared and responding to the current pandemic and being prepared for future pandemics, but really actually doing something about indoor air quality in buildings. And, just think about schools. Everybody is aware of now, like, what happens if indoor air quality in a school is worse. And there will be efforts and there will be finances and money to improve things, and we just have to throw ourselves in there and really push.
It's unfortunate we required a global pandemic to actually bring that awareness about, but so be it. Here we are.
This is
in a way,
many times.
We worked for years about schools, poor ventilation, and nobody was listening to us. And as you say, Bob, we needed a crisis to raise awareness about this topic. But we did a lot of studies using CO2 sensors in school and telling to the teachers that they need to open the window if they don't have any mechanical ventilation. And this was hard to motivate people. They were always saying, okay, there is noise outdoor. It will be cold in the classroom. There will be a safety issue. So it was hard to convince people. So now hopefully people are more convinced, and hopefully they will keep their good practices in the future.
I mean, there certainly is an acute awareness globally now. For the first time, I believe, in all of our lives, right? Indoor environments are at least at the forefront. For the time being, though, because we, as a species, have a tendency to have a very short attention span, and from what I see. So hopefully we can take this forward.
So one of the things that I always enjoyed going to the conferences, both Healthy Buildings and Indoor Air, was hearing some new topics presented during the conference. And I was wondering if each one of you could pick out one new topic that you remember was presented at this conference. I'll start with Corinne.
I can mention one. Exposome concept was discussed during the conference. So exposome is not new because it's a concept that was introduced in 2005 by Christopher Wilde. So it's not new, but it's newly discussed during Indoor Air Conference. So as we have a genome describing all our genes, there is the exposome describing all the exposure from early life in utero through until the end of our life. We are exposed to many environmental factors, also social environment. So all this is exposure define our health, and indoor air quality, indoor environment quality is part of this exposome. We are exposed to indoor pollutants through air, through settled dust. So indoor air science people have indoor air researchers have a role to play in defining, in better quantifying this exposome to better understand the relation between our exposure throughout all our life and our health. So this was new to me during Indoor Air. It's mainly discussed in exposure science conferences. So it's good that the topic is coming in our community.
Great, Martin. Any new topic? Yes, Ulla, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say maybe a little bit related to this. I was just blown away with these plenaries today, and maybe it's also because I can remember those the best. But Dusan Lisina's plenary was already mentioned, but then also Professor Jouni Jaakkola's plenary on climate change, sustainable housing and planetary health. And this concept of planetary health, including issues like climate change and pandemics and things that cannot be controlled on the cellular or individual or even public health level, but has to be looked at globally and understood better. So I thought that was really, really raising thoughts and should be taken into consideration.
And Martin, any new topics that you encountered?
Well, definitely new was the introduction of the psychosocial aspect on health, but then also the like on a more trivial basis, talking about. I was really surprised that there was a lot of presentations talking about HVAC filter dust and how they can be used for the monitoring of chemicals, monitoring of biological exposures, and then I guess with every sample method. People started looking into, what can the sample do and what can it not do. There was a really, really interesting study being presented on airflow patterns across the ventilation filter and how that's not uniform. So, if you take a sample from somewhere in that square, it's not going to be very representative. So a lot of discussion around, how can we get good representative samples for exposure during certain exposure periods. So yeah, trivial, but just intriguing. And people do microbiome determinations and longitudinal studies from HVAC filter dust. Actually, I'm just looking at Ulla there. We're doing a study like this together. Interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And students are a big part of what we talked about with summer school and things of that nature. What innovative researches were noticed and rewarded regarding student work? We'll start with Corinne.
Yeah, I noticed a very original and funny study. Actually, it was about laundry drying emission in a dwelling. We know that laundry drying is emitted a lot of humidity, and it's bad for indoor air quality because it promotes mold development. The emission from the building material can be higher when it's humid, but they looked at the VOCs that can be emitted by the different detergents that are used to clean the clothes. So they made this student, this is Florent Caron, he made a study in an experimental room of 40 cubic meter, and he washed cotton towels with different detergents, standard detergents, organic detergents, or self-made detergent, and he measured then the indoor air quality and the VOC concentration, and he observed that depending on the detergent that you are using, you can reach high concentration of some VOCs, terpenes, for example, or alcohols, over hundreds of microgram per cubic meter. So it's a bit trivial, but it's funny. It's a new source of pollution in dwellings that was not studied so much before. So I noticed this presentation from this postdoc student.
And Ulla, do you have one of the student presentations that struck you?
Well, I think the students are doing majority of the work, and nothing would get done if we didn't have the students. But yes, I had 5 of my students presenting, and it's of course really good experience for them to be able to come, probably first time for many students to come in a conference and present and participate in that way. And well, for example, I was impressed today about one undergraduate student who had done a really good review on existing indoor environment quality guidelines, and they are working to develop like a rating system based on these guidelines in Latvia, which is the country that doesn't really have many guidelines currently there. So it's good to see that that these things are picked up by students. And
great. And Martin, did you have a student presentation that struck you as well?
Well, I'm just going to I think everybody should know that basically none of the presentations, none of the keynote lectures would be without all the hard work that the students are doing on every level of the career. So really, they are like it would be hard to pick an individual one. Because they really are involved in everything, and then of course we go out and some of the students can come here. It's been a long travel for many people, so not everybody can come make a long conference trip. So it's typically the seniors that show up, maybe with a couple of students. But yeah, I can just, of course there was presentations around cleaning and how it impacts. I remember one presentation also on testing how pro-microbial cleaning would impact the indoor microbiome. I'm sorry, I'm always talking about microbiome because that's what I'm really passionate about. But I thought it was really, really interesting, the principle of applying cleaning with a pro-microbial agent and applying a biofilm of microbes onto a surface that would outcompete the settling and proliferation of pathogenic species. And that's been done in hospital environments quite a bit. And we have some information and experience from there, but then we really don't know how that would work in a messy indoor environment where you have a lot of microbial sources and so on. So I think of course, companies sell without necessarily having all that information. So it's interesting where that field is going as well.
Great. I think we've talked about most of the topics here. But I'm just wondering if we could go back a little bit more in terms of the global crisis. And it seems to be growing, the climate change seems to be a big issue, as well as indoor air quality. So it's continuing to affect where we're going in the future. How is this topic now addressed in the indoor air community? Start with Corinne.
Yeah, this topic of climate change is more and more discussed in our community. It was already discussed in the past conferences, but the focus was only energy efficient buildings and indoor air quality. Now what is discussed is much larger. We discussed the possibility to predict indoor air quality in the future in other climates, with high temperature, with higher outdoor concentration of ozone, for example, so more reactivity. Buildings will change. They will be maybe more airtight, but the behavior of people will change. So there were several sessions presenting some models to help understanding what could be indoor air quality in the context of climate change. We also discussed the issue of urban heat island. So this is becoming an important topic, and Ulla was mentioning the global health, planetary health. So this is part of the topic climate change that is now largely discussed in our community, because this is not our future, this is our present. So this is now an important topic, and this was the plenary of IAQNET this morning that Ulla already mentioned.
Great, thank you. So to summarize, and the presentation is given during Indoor Air 2020, can you, Martin, perhaps give us a brief summary of what seems to be what's going forward in terms of these topics right now?
Well, like when coming into this podcast today, I thought there is actually one message that I wanted to get through, and one topic that I really wanted to bring up. I talked about this. About the summer school, right, that was preceding the Indoor Air conference, and we had a great gang of people there. Unfortunately, we get easily carried away. So during a friendly game of football, one of the students actually broke his leg, like really badly. He went to hospital, and I think it's been all over Twitter as well. And it was just unbelievable. So he had surgery on Sunday, and he was supposed to present on Wednesday, and he was like on pain medication and whatnot. And his biggest concern, his biggest worry was that he's missing the opportunity to discuss with other scientists and with other researchers this topic, to miss the opportunity to present his work and get some feedback, and that would bring him forward. And honestly, and Don and Corinne and Ulla, we've been around in the field for a while, and during these conferences you end up in these meeting sessions where people fall silent, because you realize that so how do we continue, how do we push things forward, how do we bring things on the agenda, how do we change what has been going on for the past 30 years. And then you see these young extremely bright and passionate researchers coming up, and you feel like a bit more at peace, and I think that they're gonna take over and get the new energy in. So to me, this was maybe the most inspiring moment of the whole conference. He delivered this talk directly from the hospital live, so it was great to see. And there's so much talent out there, and people care. And I think also that is something where the pandemic really kicked us in. There is more interest in this field now.
Great. Ulla, do you want to summarize what you saw at this conference?
Well, I think for me it was mostly just this coming back together after the long break and meeting in person, and being able to discuss about ongoing issues and planning new collaborations, and also participating in fun social activities. Luckily, it was only one leg that was broken, but
we don't want anybody else to break their legs, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's good that there's only one leg broken. I would agree.
Corinne, given that there are future conferences coming up, perhaps you could give us a little details what ISIAQ has planned for the near future.
Yes, we have 2 healthy buildings 2023 next year. The first one in Germany in June in Hagen, and the second one in July in Tianjin, China. So if you missed Indoor Air 2022, join us next year during Healthy Buildings 2023.
Great, that's terrific. So we're out of time. I really appreciate our guests today being very open and very good in terms of providing us with an insight into what happened in Indoor Air 2022. So back to Bob.
Yeah, thanks so very much. This is great, and it was relatively technical difficulty free. Bringing you halfway around the planet, so that was great. Yeah, so we'll be back again next month for another show. Where will we be? We don't know yet, Donna. We'll probably be in our static positions, I'm assuming. But I just wanted to again mention that this show is a collaboration between ISIAQ, the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate, and the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, IEQ-GA, partnered together with us at Healthy Indoors to create this program, and we're excited to continue bringing these shows to you on a monthly basis. So I guess for Don and for all of our guests, we will see you shortly, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.